Hello, online arts community. Welcome to Fleetwood-Jourdain Theater's Stay Creative in collaboration with Piven Theater Workshop, a journey through the history of Black theater, a series with me, Professor Bria Walker. This week will be a two-part series chronicling one of the most prolific playwrights the world has known, August Wilson. We will take a look at his life and his seminal work, the 10-play century cycle, the decade-by-decade chronicle of African-American history in the 20th century. August Wilson was born Frederick August Kittle Jr. in 1945 in the Hill District neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His mother was Daisy Wilson, a Black woman who cleaned homes for a living, and his father was Frederick Kittle, a white German immigrant and baker. Wilson was the fourth of 6 children. In his childhood, everyone called him Freddie. From the 1930s to the 1950s, the Hill District of Pittsburgh had a diverse makeup of people. As the city grew and became an industrial core, European immigrants and Southern Blacks of the Great Migration flocked to Pittsburgh for economic opportunity. Many of them settled in the Hill District. Economic opportunity and a vibrant night scene helped to make the Hill District a magnet for culture. You had night spots like the Granada Theater, the famed Crawford Grill, and the Savoy Ballroom, which brought greats such as Lena Horne, Billy Eckstine, and Earl Father Hines. According to the documentary Wiley Avenue Days, quote, from the 1930s to the 1950s, the Hill District emerged as one of the most prosperous and influential Black communities in America, end quote. By the mid-1950s, urban decay and renewal began to decimate many American cities, and Pittsburgh was no exception. In the early 60s, the city needed a place to erect its new arena, which they would call the Civic Arena. In order to make way for its construction, the city decided to demolish the now decaying Lower Hill District. This decimation would lead to the displacement of over 8,000 residents and over 400 businesses. Many white residents were granted loans to purchase homes in the suburbs surrounding the city, while many Blacks were offered public housing options within the Upper and Middle Hill District. This would serve as the model for some of the first public housing units in America. It is within this economic and historical transition that Freddie grew up and in. When his parents divorced, he, his mother, and his siblings moved from the Bedford Avenue area of the Hill to the mostly white neighborhood of Oakland. After facing relentless bigotry at many schools, Freddie would end up at Gladstone High School in the then predominantly white Pittsburgh neighborhood of Hazelwood. When he was 15 years old, Freddie wrote an impressive essay on Napoleon. His teacher, not believing that a Black student could write such a paper, accused him of plagiarism. Freddie, being fed up with the school system, secretly dropped out and pursued an independent education at various places. One being the main branch of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, another in the 5-cent blues records he bought as a youth, and lastly, on the streets of the Hill District, where he soaked up the language and culture of his people. Wilson later stated that, quote, I dropped out of school, but I didn't drop out of life. I would leave the house each morning and go to the main branch of the Carnegie Library in Oakland where they had all the books in the world. I felt suddenly liberated from the constraints of a prearranged curriculum that labored through one book in 8 months, end quote. In 1962, Freddie enlisted in the U.S. Army for 3 years, but left after 1 year of service. He then worked odd jobs as a dishwasher, porter, cook, and gardener to support himself. In 1965, he purchased his first typewriter for $20, using money paid to him by his sister Frida for writing a term paper for her. At this time, he would begin to write poetry. Following his father's death in 1965, 20-year-old Freddie adopted the pen name August Wilson as an homage to his mother and declared himself a poet. Wilson was heavily influenced by Malcolm X and the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement of the 60s. In 1968, Wilson and his friend, director, and playwright Rob Penny co-founded the Black Horizons Theater. The theater was built to produce works that would advance the Black Power movement. Wilson withdrew from formal operations at the Black Horizons Theater in 1969, but stuck around informally until 1971, when he would leave completely. According to University of Pittsburgh professor Dr. Lawrence Glasgow, quote, August had learned much during his year at Black Horizons. His involvement had given him a crash course in nearly all facets of theater. It even inspired him to try his hand at writing a play, an effort that ended disastrously. He had one character say to the other, "Hey man, what's happening?" The other answered, "Nothing." August says he sat there for 20 minutes and neither of the characters would say anything. Finally, August said to himself, "Well, that's all right. After all, I'm a poet. I don't have to be a playwright. To hell with writing plays. Let other people write plays." It would be 4 years before he would again try his hand at playwriting. Whatever the reason or reasons for August's breakup with Black Horizons, the breakup left him angry for a long time. August stated, "I don't need this," and vowed to return to his first love, poetry. He said, "Y'all do that. I'm going over here, write my poems, and do my own thing." End quote. Wilson returned to poetry but struggled to find his own poetic voice. After much frustration, he began to re-engage, albeit tentatively, with the Black Horizons Theater. This re-engagement was influenced by the appearance of artist and teacher Claude Purdy and his girlfriend, Elva Branson, who was now the new director of Black Horizons. Purdy became Wilson's friend and mentor and encouraged him to forget his avant-garde poetry and write in the way Black people actually talk. He urged him to find himself. A couple of years later, Wilson would write his first play entitled Recycled. Recycled was inspired by an actual tragedy and explored the figure of the outsider, a concept that had long intrigued Wilson. A couple of years later, he wrote his next play, The Coldest Day of the Year, which was inspired by Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. After meeting Rob Penny's fellow classmate and colleague, Dr. Vernell Lilly, who created Kuntu Repertory Theater, August forged a working relationship with her. She would stage his next play, The Homecoming, which was an early version of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Unfortunately, the plays were not successful and still did not quite capture Wilson's voice. In effect, he returned to his poetic roots and joined a Black Studies initiative at the University of Pittsburgh called the Kuntu Writers Workshop, founded by Rob Penny and actress Misha Batten. Leaning on the advice of Claude Purdy to do something artistic that also had popular appeal, and dancer, artist, and friend Bob B.J. Johnson, Wilson decided to adapt his pre-written long poem, Black Bart in the Hills, into a musical satire. He, Purdy, Johnson, and Batten got right to work. The new title became Black Bart and the Sacred Hills and was loosely based on the Lysistrata story plot. The musical showcased how Wilson was beginning to write dialogue that reflected how people actually talked. Everyone from the creative team to the actors were excited about the show. But at the last minute, Wilson had to cancel the production as he was unable to raise the funding needed to continue. A string of artistic disappointments coupled with a big falling out with Dr. Vernell Lilly resulted in Wilson announcing his decision to leave Pittsburgh and move to St. Paul, Minnesota. Why St. Paul, you might ask? Well, August had been in touch with Purdy, who had moved to the St. Paul area. Purdy had begun working with Penumbra Theater Company and had fallen in love with the city and the company. Wanting to work with Wilson again and missing his friend, Purdy sent Wilson a plane ticket and an offer to revise his production of Black Bart at Penumbra. Wilson took him up on his offer, and in January of 1978, Wilson moved to St. Paul, Minnesota. While at Penumbra, Wilson concentrated more on playwriting and became a company member. Black Bart and the Sacred Hills became his first professional production. Wilson dealt with various artistic setbacks at Penumbra, but eventually found success. In 1979, Wilson would write Jitney, which he considered his first real play. Join us next time for part 2 as we explore Wilson's emergence into his authentic voice and examine his groundbreaking 10-play century cycle.